Yat she Carol Palmer Yenishe, Irish Nishli, Swedish Bashashin, Scottish Dashe, Bishpichai Dashanale. And we're going to talk about food safety this evening. So hopefully this will make sense, because I know we're kind of in an interesting place as far as so many challenges on the list. But I think that this is really something that's important to consider, regardless of where you're at in production. So let me just get back to there we go. Say a little bit more about my day job. So I do work with COPE, which stands for Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment. And this is an organization that was founded by a doctor. And it's a public health nonprofit. And a lot of the outreach initially was, of course, with the CHRs and things like that. But they realized very early on that you can't ask people to be healthy if it's hard for them to get food, have more food choices. I don't want to, judge food choices here, but we have a lot of challenges with junk food and just the distances that food travels. There might be some fresh food at the store that is closest, but that store still might be 50 miles away, and everything might be wrinkled and gross. And so it's a real challenge. So with that, COPE now has the Food Access Program, which has the Healthy Navajo Stores Initiative, which supports stores in stocking more variety of fresh fruits and vegetables or frozen, and also traditional foods. And then the Fruit and Vegetable Prescription Program is one that takes place with clinic partners. And so the clinics determine, mostly it's for maternal and pediatric patients who may need more fruits and vegetables in their diet. And so they enroll in this program, and there's health education, and they also receive vouchers that they can spend on fruits and vegetables at the Healthy Navajo stores. And then my particular role is with the Growers Initiative, which is farm to school and early childhood gardening support, community gardening, and then just also supporting growers, because we just don't have as many. There's more than there were, not as much as there could be. So, it's always a thing that we try to encourage. But one thing I also want to emphasize is that, the USDA decided that Navajo Nation was a food desert. And I think that that's based on Western definitions. And really, historically, there's a lot of food out there, but you have to know what it is, and you have to know when to find it, and where to find it. So these are the kinds of things that are being, unfortunately, kind of lost over time. And with climate change, some of these habitats are changing too. So things are moving around, but there is food out there. There's food out there right now, but we just need to be able to identify it. So I also wanted to frame this with the idea that it's an election year, and there are a lot of opportunities for people to bring food safety and food policy to the forefront of their discussions with potential council delegates and future presidents and such, because food is medicine, and food is a huge part of the traditional ways that it just kind of becomes a challenge to balance where things are going now versus where things have been, and how do you bring it all together. So people used to use things a lot more than they do now, as far as the plants that were gathered out in the landscape. And so medicinal plants and herbs, of course, and the traditions around food being having that corn stalk, not corn stalk, but having that corn placed in the home and having the stirring sticks there. These are protection and things that are just an integrated part of what Diné culture is all about. So I think that that's something that when we talk about food safety, we don't want to talk about it and not include that recognition that there's more to food than just food safety. There's spirituality and so many more things. So we want to bring it all together. So when some years ago, when Dana Eldridge was working on food policy things, and so these priorities come from some of her work and the idea of maintaining that connection with the sacredness of food. And I think that can still be done with food safety in mind. The sovereignty and self-sufficiency, especially in Eastern agency, it's just such a challenge to grow things, more so than on the Arizona side. And so I think that's something that um, really needs to be looked at. How can self-sufficiency still take place, and what needs to happen, what kind of infrastructure needs to be created so that that is still possible. The food and social relationships, that's something we've really been missing with COVID, that those gatherings and those get-togethers. Now, right now, it's still pretty much, pick up, take away, drive by food stuff. So that social aspect of food is still important. And then stewardship, when you're growing food, you're also caring for the environment that that food is growing in. And so with fewer people growing and caring for the land, I think that that has an impact on where we're going, or where we're at this time, not necessarily where we're going, because we can always improve that. So just again, wanted to bring in the idea that traditional planting was a very, it was a harmonious approach, because that digging stick did not disturb the land very much, as opposed to the current way with, everybody wants their big tractors and their tractor sexy, but it's not, that we've discovered that that's a problem. And so we need to find a way to transform how we do things, recognizing that it's not going to happen instantly, and we need to, there just needs to be a lot of things that are taken into consideration. We can't do away with industrial agriculture because we depend on it. It's important to us, but we can do it better. We can do it differently. So ultimately, I believe that food safety is, and I apologize if I didn't pronounce that correctly, but that's the heart and the soul. It's all together, it's all connected. And so I think that when we're talking about food safety on Navajo Nation, that's how it could be approached. So I think a lot of people are familiar with food safety from the aspect of getting that blue card from the Navajo Nation Department of Health, or whoever was in charge of that. They're not currently doing it. They're advising to do the IHS food safety training online, because of COVID, things have changed. But a lot of people do prepared foods. So, the banana breads and the burritos and the breakfast biscuits and all those kinds of things. So that's something that people are very familiar with in terms of food safety. And then meats and butchering is something that people have safe practices, traditional practices around that. And then traditional foods, a lot of that is mostly dried. And so it's got inherent qualities that are going to be a little less risky. But then the fruits and veggies that people are getting more into growing now are where there can be more challenges. So that's really where the focus of this discussion is on that farm, the farm theme. So how did we get here? So I've got this picture. Those of us that are older will remember the overhead projector. And so the reason I have this in here is because I feel like all these rules and regulations that we deal with now, they're overlays. They're not something that, the practices may have always been there, but because the US government and the state government and other municipalities define things differently and use different bureaucratic language, that things can get confusing. So we're dealing with layers, and so we want to peel all that back and simplify to get to a practical point where things are going to make sense. So how we got here is really more from our industrial agriculture world, but the Center for Disease Control, that we're all very familiar with now, if we weren't already before, but they do their statistics and they do their numbers. And so in terms of food categories that contribute to the estimated illness and death from food consumption, fresh produce is one, and meat and poultry are another, and dairy and eggs and fish and shellfish are lower down on the list. But I think the idea that 1 in 6 Americans get sick from contaminated foods or beverages each year, That's 55 million people. And that's probably a low estimate because how often have we felt a little queasy or nauseous, but we can't really figure out what it might have come from? Sometimes that could be a foodborne or a food connected illness. Maybe we ate something that wasn't quite cooked right, it just didn't agree with us. Um, and so, but we're not necessarily sick enough to go to the hospital or report it. We just get through it and we're done. And, that's so I think that it's probably underreported, but it is something to be aware of because people are still hospitalized, and at least 3,000 people a year, their death is attributed to a foodborne illness. So it can be very serious. And so that's why the regulations that we're looking at these days, that's why they came about. It's intended to keep people safer and make sure that things are being done in a good way. So the intentions are good. And I think also looking at, so the Food and Drug Administration started getting involved when they were really looking at produce contamination and outbreaks. And so a lot of these are things that, we think of we don't think of them making us sick, but they can do so. And so they've kept statistics on it. And so things like sprouts can be high contamination because of all the moisture involved and different practices involved in that production. Leafy greens. So how many recalls can we think about where there's like spinach recall, or romaine lettuce has been kind of ongoing? Again, this is more industrial level agriculture, but that's what gets us our regulations that we're trying to unwind. So the thing to keep in mind is that all the things that are on that list are usually consumed raw. So those of you that have had the food handlers, you're familiar with that training because they talk about that heat the kill step will eliminate or minimize the amount of potential for bacteria. So you're trained when you do those food handlers trainings to learn the temperatures or to know where to look up the temperatures of meat and how to measure that, or egg dishes or turkeys. So, how do you know that your hamburger is done to the right temperature? All those things. And so this is something that, sure, we think about it for meats and such, but we don't think about it for fruits and vegetables. And it's similar as far as that idea of having a kill step. So if the food is more likely to be consumed raw, if you are growing that food, even if you're not going to sell it, you want to think about what might you need to do to make sure that it's absolutely safe without, as best you can possibly assure that it's safe for consumption. So there's a Produce Safety Alliance out there that is through the Food and Drug Administration. We'll get to that in a minute. But again, the produce, they have made a list of produce that is rarely consumed raw. And I look at this list and I kind of laugh because, clearly, again, they're looking at it from an industrial level, because I think of dill and there's fresh dill out there, or peppermint. The herbs are usually something that people will eat raw as often as they eat in a dish, in a prepared food. But other things are more logical to us. And so when you think about the things that are grown on Navajo, sometimes people will grow potatoes. Potatoes are not usually consumed raw. I do have a friend that likes raw potatoes. I think that's a little strange, but that's what it is. So I can't, if I grow potatoes and I want to either give her or sell her potatoes, I don't know that she's going to cook them first. So hopefully she washes them. But again, you don't know what the person that on the other end of the food is going to do with it. So if you're selling food at a farmer's market, or if you're selling food or even giving food to a senior center, if it's a donation, that's lovely, but you don't know if they're going to cook it or not. You don't know what their practices are going to be. So that's where it comes back to you to be safe. But a lot of the traditional foods, such as the corns, the winter squash, Those are usually cooked first. Now, the green and white squash usually is roasted, but that doesn't mean that it is, because it's kind of, I kind of consider it the Navajo zucchini. It could be eaten raw. It's a pretty good um, squash. So again, is it going to be cooked? Is it going to be served raw? Those are the things to consider when we're talking about food safety and how to start thinking about that. So the FDA, because of all of the outbreaks and such, they really started looking at it, and they sort of kind of overstepped the USDA on this. So it's been a while in sorting things out. But the Food Safety Modernization Act was meant to be a way, again, to improve consumer confidence and consumer safety. So it in the initially it kind of confused things, and now they're sorting things out in a better way, because then you know, well, which rules apply? What do I have to pay attention to? Why should I care? What do I do? And so you can easily get overwhelmed, but it seems worse than it is. So, and then there's the USDA has GAP certification, which is a little different from the other the so it's a question though of, again, where is your food going? Whatever you're growing, whatever you're producing, it's really down to where it's going to go. So there are rules with that Food Safety Modernization Act as far as what's considered consumed raw and how they define everything. But really, the rule applies to farms that are selling more than $25,000 worth of produce over 3 years' time, average. So I don't think I know anybody that's selling at that level. And it would be wonderful if there were a lot of people doing that, but we're not there right now for the most part. So NAPI, of course, being the large industrial um, business that it is, they have a lot of regulations that they have to adhere to. But for the smaller growers, these upper level things really don't immediately apply. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be aware of them, and that these practices are still good practices that can be applied, whether you're making $1 or no money or $1 million. It doesn't matter. The good practices are still the good practices. It's just whether anybody's going to check up on you about it or not, and who you're going to sell to. So ultimately, again, the idea is consumer safety. So people who are really wanting that local food, that traditional food, are also usually the more vulnerable people. So young families, senior citizens, people that are, just like to cook from scratch, and just more community oriented. They may have other challenges, but they're going to be the ones that you don't want to do anything that's going to impact and harm your customers, your consumers, your family, your relatives, your friends, all those kinds of things. So again, food safety, even if you're not selling anything, I think as you're figuring out what you're going to plant, where you're going to plant it, how you're going to plant it, these practices can still be incorporated. So again, food safety is maybe I'm saying it right. So part of the reason that it's something that I've always been interested in. I don't know. I'm not a real statistics or bureaucracy geek, but I feel like it's something that, again, with food policy being kind of superimposed on Navajo and having such differences with communities and traditional practices, I feel like it's important to be aware of some of the things that are out there. But recently, what New Mexico has been doing over some years now is working on developing an approved supplier program. And it kind of started with New Mexico's public education department, but they got the legislature on board, and they got state funding, New Mexico Food and Agriculture Policy Council. And a lot of people got involved. There were a lot of collaborations. So now there's an actual program that is meant for smaller growers to be able to more easily sell to a school or a senior center or an early childhood site. And the schools and the senior centers and the early childhood sites are able to apply for state money, and I think they also get some federal money to specifically purchase local foods. So there is a buyer market developing out there for local foods. And what we don't have to match that is a lot of growers, especially in this part of the state. Navajo, there just aren't, we have so many growing challenges. And we don't have the water that other places do. So anyway, but the program is there. And I think that provides an additional support to encourage people to look into, well, okay, I would like to supply some squash at least 1 or 2 times to the senior center. How do I go about that? What do I need to do? These programs are now in place to assist people with that process. So again, it's really intended to build the local economies and the local producers. So, but it also, we want to make sure that the children and the staff at the schools and the early child care and the seniors, that everybody is safe and that the food is traceable, and that the practices being used to grow that food is considered up to date food safety practices. Doesn't have to be fancy, it's practical. But anyway, it's just something that it's there now, and it's again meant to support people. And so I think this is awesome. Arizona doesn't quite have this in place right now, but they're looking at New Mexico. New Mexico's in the forefront here on this program. So what I have become involved in, and I'm now a certified online trainer for, is this tier 1 and tier 2 practical food safety for farmers. And so this is one of the options if you were going to try to, if you wanted to sell food to a senior center or a school or something. Again, even at a small scale, even for one special event, I'm not talking about truckloads or big pallets full of stuff, even just a small amount. They still would like you to have a basic training. And with COVID, they had already started developing this training prior to COVID, but with COVID, everything needed to move online. And so now there's, and it's still evolving, but now there is an option to do these trainings online. And I think that makes it a lot easier when it can be a challenge to travel. Gas prices are not going down yet. So these online options, as long as you have good connectivity and familiarity with the internet, they're a really good benefit. So it is a collaborative program. So a lot of people have gotten together to make this work. New Mexico State being one of those, and it's awesome. So the idea was to create a good food safety community of practice, and again, to support the smaller growers, because a lot of these rules and regulations are intended for bigger industry, and they really aren't directly applicable to somebody who's just got a small plot of something that they're wanting to grow. So the New Mexico Farmers Marketing Association kind of got everybody together, but NMSU is a core partner with La Montanita Co-op, La Semilla Food Center, Agricultura Network. So, and as this has developed, then the idea was to get more trainers trained to each community. So anybody that listens to this, that's in this part of the, that's in New Mexico, you could also become a trainer. This is not something that's exclusive, because the idea is to make these trainings and this knowledge as easy to access as possible. And everybody explains things a different way, learns differently, that sort of thing. And so sometimes it just helps to have a variety of people that are able to present this information. But the goal, again, is to minimize those on-farm risks, increase buyer confidence, and then ultimately, hopefully, growers are also expanding their market opportunities. So again, food safety is cash. So the idea is that you're gonna, with these trainings, you get the knowledge, the resources that you can make those adjustments. It doesn't tell you what to do or how to do it, but it kind of makes you think about, well, what am I doing and what should I be doing differently? For example, a lot of people have animals, and maybe the corral needs attention or something like that. But if you're going from the corral where the animals are, and then you're wearing the same boots when you go out to your field, That might not be a big deal if you're growing corn because corn is above the ground, but if you're growing squash and squash is in contact with the ground, if you have manure on your boots and that manure gets onto the plants or even into the soil, the water will carry it. So anyway, you can contaminate things without even thinking about it. So these trainings kind of they help people think about what's the flow of where I am and how I have things set up. And maybe things need to be rearranged or maybe things need to be done a little differently. So the trainings also help put together the risk assessment or food safety plan ideas. And then again, the idea is that you're building confidence and building community. So just wanted to talk about a few pieces within that because the trainings themselves are several hours. So we're clearly not going to go into that. But mainly what you're thinking about when you're thinking about food safety at any level is the idea of a hazard versus a risk. So these examples, a hazard being something with the potential to cause harm. So driving on a road, you could cause harm. But the risk is, well, what's the chance that you'll be harmed? So if you're driving on a road, fine. But if you're driving on a road in a blizzard, there's more risk that something could go wrong. Or in a rainstorm, shaving your face. Michael might be able to share with that, but the idea of shaving your face, that's, a hazard. You could cut yourself, but if you're shaving a bear, that's a lot more risky. So I thought that was funny. And then using a blow dryer versus then using it in the tub where you could electrocute yourself. So hazard is one thing, risk versus is the other. How likely is it that that is going to be a problem? So that's what we're thinking about with food. So if we're looking at food related hazards and risks, so we're thinking about physical hazards, biological hazards, and chemical hazards primarily. So examples that are given here is like if there's a piece of bone in a fish, that's a physical problem, or a toothpick even. Biological would be the harmful bacteria. That's something we're familiar with these recalls. It's, E. coli is a big one, and salmonella, and that kind of stuff. Whereas a chemical can be contamination, like mercury in fish, or it could be an allergic reaction. And then the risk is determined by the exposure. So how much was there, how long, how often. So, but if there's no exposure, there's no risk. So salmonella in an egg is a hazard. If the egg is eaten raw, there may be salmonella bacteria present. So that likelihood of being exposed to that bacteria is higher. So the risk of illness is higher, as opposed to cooking it, frying your eggs. That will kill the salmonella bacteria as long as you're not doing as long as you really cook it good. So your exposure is less and the risk of illness is less. So that's what is really what you're thinking about when you're looking at any kind of hazards and risks at your farm, your garden, your ranch, whatever it may be. So if we're looking at potential hazards on farms or ranches, so physical, broken glass, nails or screws. I was just at a school garden last week where I was picking up screws all over the place. It's just not thought about. We kind of take it for granted. We don't even see it sometimes. But these are problems because there is an off chance that some of that could get into your produce somehow. There's just, weird things happen. Chemical, cleaning products, pesticides, fuel, if there's a leak, and then the allergens. A lot of people will have allergic reactions. So that's why on the things we buy at the store, it'll have that fine print, made in a product that made in processed in a factory that also processes nuts or whatever the wording is. So that's why, because people are allergic and sometimes it doesn't take much. And then the biological, of course. So manure any animal manure can carry viruses, bacteria, things that are going to be a challenge when we're wanting safe food. And then blood, if you cut yourself and that gets on the produce, there could be problems there. So lots of things to think about. But again, it's an idea of the likelihood of that contaminant being a problem versus the impact on public health there. So such as glass, it's really not likely that glass is going to jump onto your squash. But if it did, the impact on public health would be pretty high. So you'd still want to clean it up, as opposed to then looking at wood, it's still going to be so visible that people would pick it out before they wouldn't eat it unknowingly for the most part. So anyway, this is the thing, looking at what's the likelihood and what's the impact. That's the practical part of all of it. And it's just going through different aspects of your operation and looking at. And so even food contact surfaces and how are they cleaned and what kind of contact do they have with the food. So something that's in direct contact with food, the buckets or the bins that you harvest in, your hands, the tables you use, do you use a scale to weigh things? All of those are going to come in direct contact with the food. So those are where you pay the most attention to your organization, your cleanliness, as opposed to something like a compost pile that's off in the distance or the bird's nest or other things. It's less likely that those are going to contact the food, but you don't want them. We have so much wind, you wouldn't want a pile of manure blowing onto your field. So location is going to be important. And again, one of the things that we talk about in the trainings is the idea that, certain things, again, we can't control everything, but we can mitigate the risk. So for the training and the food safety to get into the New Mexico approved supplier program, you go through and you do a risk assessment, and it's really record keeping and documentation. And you're looking at different aspects of your operation. So the land use, what was it used for before, currently? Are there animals around? What's your sanitation like? What's your water source? A lot of issues around water. And so that's something to keep in mind. And then workers are, people clean, and we all think we're pretty clean, but how often do we wash our hands after we use our cell phones? How dirty is your cell phone really? Think about it. And then traceability. If you do take a box of squash to the senior center, do you know, like if there's a problem, do you know where you picked it from, what part of the field, those kinds of things. So it's just, again, a question of documentation, record keeping, organization. So that's something that is done in order to get into the program. And it's a pretty good exercise, even if you don't want to do that. It's a good thing to go through just to get that confidence and assurance that everything's being done in a good way. So most of the sources of hazards and contaminations are pretty straightforward. So we've got the 4 W's: the workers, the wildlife, the water, and the waste. And so, again, wildlife, until birds fly upside down or we can put diapers on them, you always have the potential of contamination from wildlife, even if you're in an urban area, even if you say, oh, I haven't seen any wildlife around here in years, they're still birds. And so birds poop, and that can drop anywhere. So those are the things to keep in mind. How you address that when you harvest. If you see bird poop on your squash, you do what? So you need to have that documented. You need to say what you're doing. Ideally, you're not going to sell that or give that to the senior center. You're going to keep that for yourself, or you're going to turn it into the compost pile. So it's kind of something we take for granted, but in terms of food safety, we can't take it for granted. So I think one of the advantages on Navajo is that a lot of the crops, one of the most traditional crops is corn, and corn does not come in contact with the ground. So it is going to be, just by nature, it's a very safe food. It's above ground, and it's usually cooked. So it's not something that would be in that risky category for the most part. There could be some weird, wild thing that happens, but that's it's sustained people for thousands of years. So I think it's got a pretty good track record. Whereas when you look at something like melons, a lot of people, most of the time, you're traditionally, growing it on the ground. It's just the easiest way to do it. They run around on the ground. But the problem is contact with the soil is where you can have more issues with all kinds of contamination and bacteria and such, because it'll also have as the water, if it rains or if there's flood irrigation or whatever it is, water carries bacteria, water carries parasites, water carries all kinds of things. And so, and a melon is usually eaten raw. Can't think of too many people that cook their melon. So as a as a product that would be sold or given or into a senior center or school or something, melons are going to be a lot bigger deal in terms of food safety. You want to make sure you've got good practices. You want to make sure that these melons are the safest possible melons. And when something goes wrong, it can really go wrong. And I can't remember what year it was, but not too long ago, there was an issue with, I think it was cantaloupe up in Colorado, and it was a huge problem. And I believe that that farm ended up going out of business because of the challenges with that. But there was a an issue that came about with contamination and got people sick. And so, again, melons, you got to be serious about how you're going to do things, because this is where contamination is high. There's a higher risk, so you want to pay more attention. So it's really about what you're growing. So just in looking at some of the trainings, so look at what you would do, and I'm going to expand this picture so it's easier to see. But if you look at these lovely little strawberries, what's the hazard and risk? What are the preventative actions and what are the corrective actions? So these are the kinds of things we talk about in the trainings. It's not necessarily anybody telling you what to do or how to do it. It's saying, well, what would you do? What do you see? How would you address this? So let's blow up the picture a little bit. So really pretty strawberries. A lot of people like strawberries, and strawberries are usually eaten raw. You can make them into a pie or something, but most people would just feel likely to pick it. But what do we have there also in the picture? Little tiny drops. So there's some kind of rodent running around. And so the thing with food safety, and if you see manure in the field, little droppings from something, whether it's jackrabbits or whatever it may be, that's the more visible thing that you can see is the poop. What you're not going to see as easily is the urine. So we don't know where else that animal went. We don't know if it urinated on the strawberry or not. So, and you can't scrub a strawberry easily to clean it off. So this is one of those things where there are a lot of different things you could do about it, as far as what you could do to prevent it or things like that. But in the short term, the other thing to think about, well, is this supposed to be harvested today? What is supposed to happen with this strawberry? So, for me, this would be something to where I would pick it and clean it, and it would only be for personal use, or it would go to the compost, sadly. But you can't risk selling it or giving it to community members or anybody else, because there could be a contamination issue, and we can't see it. We can't see the tiny microscopic microbes and virus, bacteria, the things that are out there. Our eyes are not that great. So just because you see the poop, you say, oh, well, that's not by the strawberry. There is some that's right over by the little strawberry in the shade. But, that's only one thing. And there's still little hairs that we can't see potentially that fell off the animal. So there's just a lot of stuff in there. So the poop is the evidence that there's something going on, but because there's going to be more going on than just that, you want to be safe. So that's what these discussions are about. What do we do? How would you do it? So maybe you would grow the strawberries and not in the ground. If you really, really wanted to do strawberry production, maybe you'd look at how you do that. Maybe you would put out traps for the animals. Maybe you would do other things. There'd be a lot of potential things to consider, but it wouldn't take a lot of work to figure out exactly how you wanted to approach it, because fencing and rodents, they're small. So you can't eliminate all risk, but what you're working on is reducing your risk. So, if you've got squash and you've got melons, and you've got corn and all these wonderful things, that's awesome. Those buckets are clean, our little happy, friendly Home Depot buckets. They've been washed out, they're clean. So the melons are in there. And then whether you wash them before you give them to your buyer or your senior center or wherever it is, that depends on what they're going to do with them. So that's the other thing when you're looking at these food safety plans and risk assessments and things like that. You want to look at, well, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to take it to the farmer's market? Am I going to try to um, sell it to the senior center? Well, then you go and talk to the senior center and you say, okay, what do you need? How do you need this? And they'll say, well, just give us the whole melon. We're going to wash it and cut it up as we usually do anyway. So then you don't have to worry about washing it or doing anything with it there. Farmers market, there's all kinds of different consumers that come through there. And so there's no way to know how everybody's going to do it. So the best thing you can do is educate people as they are buying from you. And you say, well, wash this before you cook it, or wash this before you eat it. You don't have to wash everything yourself or do everything yourself, but you do have the responsibility of talking with your consumers, talking with your buyers if you're going to sell stuff, and see how they prefer it. So, of course, I talk to myself, but sometimes I need an expert opinion. There's another level called GAP certification. That's something that's different because it's considered a third-party audit. There's another inspector that comes and checks you out. You have to pay for the services. It's usually you're paying for travel and all these other things. And so it's something that, again, you would want to be in a place where you're making consistently good money before you would need this. And a lot of buyers don't require this. So again, it's based on what you're doing with your produce. Any of these food safety practices should be just something that you do, but whether you get the certifications is dependent on who you're selling it to. And most schools don't require GAP certification, especially on the New Mexico side. I think on the Arizona side they do, and that's something that a lot of Arizona people are working to revise that. Again, not to eliminate the safety aspect, but to eliminate the expense because it's very expensive. So again, water is a big issue. And I think, again, when you're talking about potential for food policy on Navajo, there are a lot of different aspects that can be discussed with that. But for a lot of us, it's also important because you can't make coffee without water. So if you really want to geek out on food safety, there's a fabulous website, foodsafetyclearinghouse.org. And that is something that, if you have questions or concerns, there's just a lot of information there. So it's a really great resource. Again, love or hate the internet, it gives us a lot that we didn't used to have access to a lot more easily. And so one of those things is to find out if water testing is required, where are the labs? And I think this is where NTUA could be brought into the conversation. Could NTUA be providing water testing for growers? Usually the main thing that is a concern is E. coli, and NTUA tests for E. coli in consumer water. So it's something that could be worked out, but there isn't a formal, that I'm aware of, there isn't a formal process for it. But otherwise, if you're not, if you need a water test, you'd have to go to Santa Fe or down by, south of Las Cruces. It's just not easy to do. And water tests are time sensitive. So this is an area where if water tests are going to be required, then this is something that we all have to work together on to figure out, well, how can this be easier for growers to accomplish? Because otherwise, then that's discouraging for people to do things in a good way if there are too many barriers. And also educating the consumers. We've come to a place in time where a lot of people feel more confidence in the food that they buy from the grocery store than they do in the food that they buy from a grower that's grown locally. I've had personal experience with this, and I just find it very funny because, if something isn't perfect like in the grocery store, then it must not be good. So I think we have to take it upon ourselves to remind people that there are a lot fewer people touching your food if you're buying it from the people that grew it. Whereas if you're getting it at the store, you've got all these other people. You've got the big farm, the however it traveled, whoever handled it at the grocery store before it finally gets to your table. So this is something that it's our responsibility to educate consumers about, that it's important to support local food. We can't just talk about wanting to have, oh, I want to have traditional squash here and there, but if nobody's growing it, nobody has incentive to grow it, then we're kind of, it's two different conversations that don't make sense. So again, food safety is another aspect of it, and I think it needs to be discussed more than it has been. I'd like to see it be something that is incorporated into, because I don't want to see the overlay. I want to see the Navajo version. So that's what on my soapbox is. And again, it's an election year, so we're going to have a lot more of this. We already have all this on an ongoing basis, and it's not just Navajo with the lip pointing, there's finger pointing in the Billigana world, and we need to come together. So this is something where the more we can do together, the farther we're going to get, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So I think we've learned a lot these past couple years with COVID, and where we need to be better is still at how we collaborate, how we come together to improve things for us now and for the generations to come. So of course, I want to grow my own food, can't find any bacon seeds. Kids need to know where the food comes from. I bet you there's some kids that are going to start looking for bacon seeds if they thought they existed. So again, it's our responsibility to educate, be aware, think about it, not be overly caught up in the details so much as doing things in a good way. I think that's the ultimate thing that I've learned, is that with the traditional ways, you're doing things with a good heart. So the more you can do something with a good heart, the better it is for everybody. So yeah, thank you. And that's my spiel.
Okay, thank you, Carol. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand or either type it in the chat box, and we can get it answered. Okay, just a comment from Michael. Great information and guidance. Thanks, Carol. Thank you, Carol. I do have a question for you. If a producer wants to, get certified, is there a co-op or a group that they can talk to get started on this program?
Yes. So if there's, we're still talking here like fruits and vegetables, because for meat producers, there's that whole other adventure of USDA certification, blah, 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 with butchering. But in San Juan County, there is the Harvest Food Hub that's developed now, and connected to that, there's a Shiprock Food Hub that's still evolving. And so these food hubs are a place where they kind of act as an umbrella to make things easier. So with Harvest Food Hub, you can, as a grower, go and talk to them, and I think there's an application or something, but you can take the training with them and you can get into their program. And then if you only have a small amount, they will put that together with other growers' small amounts so that there's a bigger amount to sell to a school or sell to a restaurant or something like that. So they become the middleman. And right now, because they're really trying to just work out the details and get things established, there's no percentage that they're taking. I believe it's all still grant funded as much as possible. So something like that is a place to take, again, smaller amounts. There really isn't, because we still have such a small number of growers. There are a couple of co-ops that are developing in Arizona, and then the Shiprock traditional farmers have their own co-op, as far as Chiliazi and several of the growers in there, of some of those farmers. So they're putting their stuff together, and I think they're taking it to the Harvest Food Hub at this point, again, because it's a little easier. But it's something that can be discussed more and worked on more as far as, well, what does a co-op look like? Who do we have that even wants to be a part of it? How can we grow this and evolve this? Uh, because there are a lot of advantages to doing things in that way. Because I think one of the challenges we face is that we think we have to do it all ourselves, and that's really not true. We can be collaborative and we can work with others to grow more together, um, and even have diversity. So there's a lot of potential and a lot of opportunity, and we just need people that want to take it on and do stuff, because it can be fun. It can be really cool. I know there are a lot of people that would love to buy or, have that available. And so we've got the demand, but we don't have the supply.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And then, another question, if there's an organization that would want training, are you able to provide the training for them, or would the organization have to go directly to, above you?
Oh, well, so yeah, at this point, I don't provide the training independently because it's a lot of information to cover. And so really with the group that's organized right now with the New Mexico Grown Program, it's a collaboration. And so there are usually, for these online trainings, there are usually at least two of us that are doing the presenting, and then a couple other people that are in the background handling some of the technology and some of the more technical questions. So it's a group effort, and really, so it's right now the trainings are monthly online through Zoom. The tier 1 training for the New Mexico Grown program is 2.5 hours, and the tier 2 training is 3 hours. So, and then there's stuff to do on the side as far as some of the creating your own, working on your risk assessment and creating a map of what your operation looks like, those kinds of things. So there's other steps involved with that. And I actually didn't put the link in my training, but but it's it can be easily, anybody that's interested can contact me about how to get into it. But New Mexico Farmers Marketing Association is kind of housing the main portal to sign up for that. And so, and it is something that costs $25 to become a part of, which is, they initially did it for free, and now it's that's not being covered. But the Produce Safety Alliance training is more expensive. So again, for a small grower, this is a really well worth the $25 to go through it. But yeah, I don't do it by myself. So.
Right. Okay.
Good question.
Thank you. And then we have a comment from Daniel Bladel. Thank you, Carol. Really good information. There are so many advantages to producing food locally. Thanks for mentioning it. And I couldn't agree more. So, I believe that concludes our Q&A session. I know we're past, our time. But I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll right now. And if you guys could fill that out for us, and that would be great. But, in the meantime, thank you, Carol, for providing your presentation this evening. I know as we progress in gardening, and, everybody is getting up to, we all want to know where our food is being grown. Is it safe? And so that's why we felt the need to provide this presentation for our producers. So thank you again, Carol, for setting aside some time this evening for your presentation. And I thank you everyone for joining us. And while you guys are filling out your form, your evaluation, I would just like to invite you guys next week. We're going to be switching gears. We're going to have Benita Litzen from Diné College Land Grant Office provide her proper livestock handling, and that's June 1st, Wednesday evening from 5:30 to 6:30. If you guys go to our website, go under the upcoming events tab, and you will see our monthly webinars that we have going on. So go ahead and check it out, register for next week's event webinar. And then also email us if you guys have any questions, if you guys want some material. And we're posting our PowerPoint slides, webinar PowerPoint slides onto our website under the workshops and webinars tab. And then we also have our YouTube channel and then our Facebook page, that has our videos, and then also our flyers and any type of information that we're providing, and then also USDA's programs as well. And then we do have our monthly newsletters that we put out every month. Subscribe, email us and subscribe on there, and you can find it on our website. And we have livestock and horticulture topics on there, as well as useful USDA information. So go ahead and check it out when you guys have time. If you need to get a hold of us, our email is up there, myself, and then Kelly. And then we do have a vacant position if you guys are interested or know anybody that could fill the position. So with that, the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project is a New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service initiative delivered in collaboration with the Ned College Land Grant Office and the COPE program, which is Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment. This project is being funded by USDA's Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program. The staff consists of myself. I am the field coordinator, and then we have our field specialist, who is Kelly Lantana, and then our project director, Dr. Michael Patrick. Under our program, we have 3 goals. First, as you guys can see, is to improve the operations, profitability, and sustainability of socially disadvantaged Navajo farmers and ranchers and veteran farmers and ranchers. And then we are also increasing our Navajo farmers and ranchers' knowledge and use of USDA programs such as NRCS, FSA, Rural Development and Risk Management Agency programs and services of other resource providers. And then lastly, we are increasing the local production and consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables and healthy food by Navajo families and individuals through our gardening programs and our webinars, as we are going to be seeing this evening.